The forbidden fruit. Jake Carter had never seen a planet like this before. His ship had crash-landed on a strange alien world. The sky was purple, the grass was silver, and the air felt heavy, like it was watching him. Jake was a space explorer, trained to survive in any condition. But this place felt different. He had no food, no signal, and no idea if help would ever come. 3 days had passed since the crash. His water pack was nearly empty. His legs were weak, and his stomach growled louder with each step. He kept walking, hoping to find something, anything, that could keep him alive. Then he saw it. Through the thick alien trees, glowing softly under the strange sun, there was a tree with fruits that looked like blue fire. Each fruit pulsed with light, like a slow heartbeat. They hung low, almost as if they wanted to be picked. Jake hesitated. "This looks dangerous," he whispered. His training told him, never eat unknown alien plants. But his body begged for food. He looked up again. One of the fruits dropped on the ground, as if inviting him. Slowly, carefully, Jake picked it up. It was warm. It hummed in his hand. With one deep breath, he bit into it. The taste was sweet. Too sweet. It felt like light exploded in his mouth. He took another bite, then another, until the fruit was gone. For a moment, he felt full, warm, even happy. But then, the ground shook. The sky turned dark purple. A strange wind blew through the trees, whispering in a language he didn't understand. Suddenly, he felt burning pain in his arm. He looked down and gasped. Glowing marks were appearing on his skin, strange symbols, like they were written with fire. They moved slowly, crawling across his skin like living tattoos. And then, he heard it. A voice, not out loud, but in his mind. "You have eaten what was sacred. Now you belong to me." Jake fell back in fear. He looked around, but there was no one there. The voice was female, calm, but powerful, like it came from the planet itself. "No, this can't be real," he whispered. He stood up and ran. Branches scratched him. The wind howled louder. He didn't know where he was going, just away from that tree, that voice, that feeling. After what felt like hours, Jake collapsed near a glowing rock. His breathing was heavy. His heart raced. The marks on his arm were still there, glowing slowly, pulsing with light. "What did I do?" he said to himself. He looked up at the stars. They were brighter than Earth's stars, more alive. But something told him he wasn't alone anymore. Something had seen him, something ancient, and now it had claimed him. That night, Jake dreamed of a woman with eyes like gold and hair like liquid stars. She stood in a field of light, looking at him without speaking. When he woke up, her voice still echoed in his mind. "You belong to me." He touched the marks on his arm. They pulsed once, in reply. Jake Carter had come to this planet looking for answers. But now he had a new question. Who was the voice, and why did she say he belonged to her? Somewhere, deep in the heart of the planet, something stirred. A figure opened her eyes in a temple hidden by time. She smiled. The sacred bond had been made. The goddess was awake. The mark of the goddess. The alien goddess marked me after I ate her sacred fruit. Jake Carter didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, he was staring at the glowing marks on his arm. The next, he was waking up on something soft and warm, like a bed made from light. He blinked slowly. His body felt strange, too light, too quiet. The air smelled like sweet flowers and something ancient. He sat up and looked around. He wasn't in the forest anymore. He was inside a massive glowing cave, walls made of crystal, dripping with blue light. The ground shimmered beneath him. Strange symbols floated in the air. Some looked like the marks on his arm. He stood slowly. His head spun for a second, but he felt stronger, healthier, almost renewed. Then he heard footsteps, graceful, calm, powerful. From the far end of the cave, a figure walked toward him, tall, glowing softly with a light not from this world. Her skin shimmered like stardust. Her eyes were golden, glowing like twin suns. Her long white hair floated as if underwater. She didn't walk. She glided. Jake froze. It was her. The woman from his dreams. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman tilted her head slightly. Her expression was calm, but her presence was heavy, like she carried the weight of 1,000 years. "I am Valira," she said. Her voice was smooth, but echoed inside his mind like a bell. "Guardian of Silara, keeper of the old ways, the last of the starborn." Jake swallowed hard. "Why? Why did you bring me here?" "You ate the sacred fruit," she said, stepping closer. "You were not meant to. It is the fruit of bond. Only the chosen may taste it." "I didn't know," Jake said quickly. "I was starving. I thought I was going to die." "I know," she interrupted. "The planet allowed it. The fruit does not fall unless it agrees. You were desperate, but still, the bond has been formed." Jake looked at the glowing marks on his arm. "What bond? What does that even mean?" Valira's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are now marked by the goddess of Silara. You carry my energy. You are mine." Jake stepped back. "Yours? No, I'm not anyone's." She didn't react. "The bond is not control. It is connection. You feel it already, don't you?" He hesitated. She was right. Even now, standing near her, he could sense her emotions. Calm, curious, a little sad. He felt the air around her move through his lungs. Her voice didn't just enter his ears. It touched his thoughts. It was like they were linked. "What happens now?" he asked, voice trembling. Valira turned and walked to a pool of glowing water. "Now you must understand. The bond is not complete. To finish it, you must pass the trials of the marked." "Trials?" Jake asked. "What kind of trials?" Valira looked into the pool. Images formed on the surface, places Jake had never seen before. A dark jungle, a mountain floating in the sky, a sea made of fire. "You must prove your spirit is worthy. Each trial will bring you closer to what you are becoming." "I didn't ask for this," Jake said. Valera turned to him again, her face calm but intense. "Neither did I. But fate chooses, and fate rarely makes mistakes." Jake looked down at his hands. The marks on his skin pulsed slowly, matching the rhythm of his heart. Part of him wanted to run, find a way off this planet, get back to Earth. But a stronger part, the part touched by the fruit, wanted to stay, to understand. He sighed. "If I do these trials, can I leave afterward?" Valera stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, "When the bond is complete, you will understand what truly matters." Her answer wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was something deeper. Before he could ask more, the cave trembled slightly. A rumble rolled through the air like a warning. Valera's eyes narrowed. "They're here," she whispered. "Who?" She turned toward the cave's entrance. "Outsiders, not from this world." They felt the bond awaken. They seek to take what does not belong to them. Jake's heart skipped. "You mean they're coming for you?" "No," she said. "They're coming for us." The marks on Jake's skin flared suddenly, bright and hot. For the first time, Jake understood. The bond had made him more than a visitor. He was part of this world now. And the galaxy had noticed. The trial of the marked one. Jake stood at the edge of the glowing cave, his heart pounding. The sky above Silara had darkened again. Thick clouds swirled slowly like smoke. The silver trees of the forest trembled as if the planet itself had sensed danger. Valera stood beside him, her long hair floating in the still air, her golden eyes watching the horizon. "The ones who come are not welcome," she said. "They do not understand this planet. They take, they break, and they fear what they cannot own." Jake didn't need to ask who she meant. He already knew. Humans. Not explorers like him. No. These were scavengers, smugglers, pirates. People who followed distress signals, not to help, but to steal. They came for the signal from my ship, Jake said quietly. And now they smell the bond. Valera replied. They think it can be sold. Used. Jake clenched his fists. They're wrong. Valera turned toward him, her expression unreadable. Then prove it. He blinked. What? You asked to break the bond. To return to your world, she said. But before any of that, you must pass the trials. The first one begins now. Jake looked around. Now. But we're under threat. Valera raised one glowing hand, and a strange wave of energy passed through the air. The forest grew still. Time itself seemed to slow down. This planet obeys my will, she said softly. The first trial waits for you in the dark marsh. Jake had seen it earlier in the visions, a place where the fog never lifted, where the trees bent unnaturally, and where strange sounds echoed from nowhere. Even Valera had spoken of it with respect. And what exactly is the trial? He asked. Valera stepped closer. The marsh is made of memory. It shows you what you fear, what you regret, what you've buried deep. Jake frowned. So, it's all in my head. No, she said, but what happens inside can still break you. She touched his forehead gently, and the world shifted. When Jake opened his eyes, he was no longer at the cave. He was standing knee-deep in a dark green marsh. Thick fog covered everything. The trees were twisted and leafless, like frozen skeletons. The water was cold and sticky. There was no wind, no sound, just silence. He moved slowly, every step hard to make. The fog tugged at him, whispering things he couldn't fully understand. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, then cried. He paused. A shape moved through the fog. Hello, he called. No answer. Then the shape stepped closer. Jake's heart nearly stopped. It was his brother. His brother Daniel, who had died 5 years ago during a space accident. An accident Jake had blamed himself for. But Daniel looked alive, whole, dressed in his old spacesuit, smiling. You left me, Jake, the figure said. You promised to bring me home. Jake took a step back. You're not real. You're not real. The figure's smile vanished. Its face twisted into pain. You let go of the rope. I was right there. You let go. Jake fell to his knees. The memory hit him hard. It was true. He had let go. In zero gravity, tethered by only one cable, Daniel had slipped into the void when Jake made a split-second decision. It had haunted him every night since. No, Jake whispered, shaking. I tried to save you. I couldn't. The fog thickened. More shapes appeared. His old crew. His father. People he had failed. People he had disappointed. All whispering, all accusing. You don't belong anywhere. You always run. You're not a hero. Jake covered his ears, screaming. But the voices were in his head now, deep inside, crawling. Then, light. A soft, golden glow. The voices faded. Valera's voice echoed gently in his mind. You are more than your past. Remember who you are becoming. Jake opened his eyes and stood up slowly. His legs shook, but he did not fall. He took one deep breath, then shouted, I am not perfect. I've made mistakes. But I'm still here. I'm still trying. The fog hissed, and then began to pull back. The shadows faded. The water cleared. The sky above turned a soft blue. The marsh was still strange, but it no longer felt like it wanted to swallow him whole. He had faced his fear. The trial was complete. Moments later, he was standing once more in the crystal cave. Valera stood waiting. He fell to his knees, exhausted. You saw, he said. You knew what I'd face. She nodded slowly. The bond tests more than strength. It tests your soul. The marks on his body glowed brighter now. The symbols had changed shape, longer, more complete. Jake didn't know what was happening to him, but he did know one thing. He had passed the first trial. But what came next would be even harder. The bond deepens. Jake Carter sat near the glowing pool inside the crystal cave, staring at the strange symbols now etched along his arms and neck. They had grown brighter after the trial in the dark marsh, changing shape again, as if alive. They didn't hurt, but he could feel them, like they were watching, breathing, becoming a part of him. Valera sat across from him, silent. For a while, neither of them spoke. There was something peaceful in the silence. The cave hummed gently. Lights danced on the water's surface. It didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a heartbeat, a living place. Jake finally broke the silence. Back there, in the marsh, I saw my brother. I saw everyone I've failed. It felt too real. Valera nodded. The marsh pulls from your soul. It shows you what you hide, even from yourself. Jake leaned back, letting out a slow breath. So I passed. She didn't smile, but there was something softer in her eyes. You endured. That is the first step. Then her expression changed, more serious now. But the bond, it is not just a mark, not just power. It connects more than mind and body. It connects feeling, thought, memory. Jake looked up at her. You're saying you felt what I went through. Valera nodded once. Yes, I walked the marsh with you. I saw your pain. He wasn't sure why, but her words hit him deep. No one had ever said that before. Not even back on Earth. No one had truly seen his pain. And now, this goddess, this being of stars and light, had felt it with him. He looked away quickly. So, how deep does this bond go? She stood slowly, walking toward a high ledge inside the cave. The crystals above her glowed brighter as she moved. When a soul touches sacred fruit, she said, it awakens old magic, a bond once used to connect rulers to the heart of the planet. It was meant for unity, but it faded long ago. She looked back at him. Until you. Jake got to his feet, his voice low. Why me? Why now? The fruit only falls when it chooses. The planet, the life around us, it knew. That I was starving. That you were lost. Jake didn't have a reply. Later that day, Valera led him out of the cave into a new part of the forest. The sky had changed again, this time a warm pink. Floating lights drifted through the air like tiny spirits. The trees here were tall and soft, their leaves humming low music as the wind moved. Jake looked around in awe. I didn't know a place like this could exist. Valera glanced at him. Most never see this side of Silara, only those who are bonded. They walked together for a while, and for the first time, Jake didn't feel like a visitor. He felt like he belonged. As they crossed a glowing river, he noticed animals watching from the trees, strange, beautiful creatures, not afraid. Some bowed their heads slightly when they saw Valera. They recognize you, Jake said, surprised. They recognize you too, she replied. He raised an eyebrow. Why would they recognize me? Because your energy has changed. The bond touches everything. Land, air, water, life. You're becoming part of this world. Jake looked at his hands again. The marks were not just brighter. They were warmer. He could feel the ground beneath him, hear the wind like a voice. Is that why I can feel your thoughts sometimes? He asked quietly. Valera didn't answer at first. Then she said, yes, and I feel yours. He stopped walking. You've been inside my mind. Not to steal, not to harm. The bond only shows what you allow. I felt your fear, your loneliness, your guilt, and also your strength. He looked at her for a long time. No one had ever said that about him before. They kept walking in silence, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It felt natural, like two rivers slowly merging. That night, Jake sat near a quiet fire, watching the stars above. Valera sat across from him again, her hands resting gently on her knees. She was still, calm, almost glowing in the night. "I'm scared," Jake admitted suddenly. Valera looked up. "Of what?" "Of losing myself, of becoming something I don't understand." She nodded slowly. "Change is never easy, but fear is part of becoming." He looked into her eyes. "And what about you? What are you afraid of?" That made her pause. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she said, "I've watched thousands come and go. I've lived longer than time remembers. But I've never bonded with anyone." Jake's breath caught. "You've always been alone." She nodded once. "And now that you're not." She looked at him quietly. "Now, I am afraid of losing you." For the first time, Jake didn't feel like a mistake. He didn't feel like just a survivor or a burden. He felt seen. He felt chosen. As he drifted off to sleep under the alien sky, Jake realized something strange. He no longer wanted to break the bond. He wanted to understand it, to grow with it, to protect it. But somewhere out there, in the darkness, danger still waited. The scavengers had not given up. And the bond that now gave him peace was also painting a target on his back. The betrayal. The stars above Silora had started to dim. A strange tension moved through the planet, like the calm before a storm. Jake Carter felt it in his bones. He had been living near Valera's sanctuary for several days now. Each morning, he woke with more control over the bond. He could feel the heartbeat of the planet. He could sense the emotions of the animals around him. The plants even leaned toward him when he passed, as if greeting one of their own. And Valera, she had changed too. She laughed more now. Soft, short laughs, but real. She told him about ancient wars, about how she once sang to the stars, and how she thought no one would ever touch her soul again. Jake wasn't sure what this feeling was. Not just connection. Not just understanding. Something deeper, but he was afraid to name it. Because deep down, he knew peace never lasted long. It began with a flicker of sound, an unnatural buzz, high above the trees. Jake froze mid-step during his morning walk. Birds scattered from the branches. The ground gave off a sharp hum. He looked up. A small ship, black and silent, hovered above the forest line. Not Valera's, not from Silora. Jake's heart dropped. They found me. Within hours, the scavengers had landed. A small group, 4 men and 1 woman, walked into the forest like they owned it. They wore gray exosuits, high-tech visors, and heavy boots that crushed glowing plants beneath them. One of them held a scanner. There, that energy signature, same as the distress beacon. Jake watched from the shadows, hiding behind a thick tree. He could hear their words clearly. The woman, tall, sharp eyes, spoke coldly. And the mark. Still active. Whoever has it is close. Jake knew what they were after. The mark. The power. The connection to the goddess. And he knew they wouldn't ask politely. He could have run back to Valera. But he didn't. He stepped out from behind the tree. "I'm the one you're looking for," he said. All 5 turned, weapons aimed. "Jake Carter," the woman said with a smile. "We didn't think you were alive." "I didn't expect to be," he said, "but I'm not leaving with you." She laughed. "Oh, you misunderstand. We're not here to rescue you. We're here to take what's inside you." Jake didn't flinch. "It doesn't belong to you." The man with the scanner walked up, eyes scanning Jake's body. Those marks, alien tech, right, bio-linked energy, could power a weapon for decades. Jake stared at them. "It's not a weapon." The man smirked. "Everything's a weapon if you aim it right." Suddenly, one of the mercenaries stepped forward and slammed something into Jake's side. A shock pulse. He dropped to the ground, body seizing. The last thing he heard before blacking out was, "Cut the mark off him if you have to." When Jake woke up, he was inside a cage, made of metal, but humming with energy. His body ached. The marks on his skin were dimmer now, like they were frightened. He looked up. The scavengers were arguing. "We can't remove the mark. It's linked to his nervous system. We don't need him. Just kill him and bring the body." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Then, the lights around them flickered. The forest went silent, and a glow moved through the trees like rising fire. Valera had arrived. She didn't run. She floated across the ground, golden eyes blazing, long hair moving like it was underwater. The plants bowed as she passed. One of the men raised his weapon. "Stay back." But she didn't speak. With a wave of her hand, his weapon turned to dust. The others fired. Energy blasts lit up the forest, but none of them reached her. The wind itself turned, wrapping around her like a shield. Trees grew instantly, trapping two of the attackers in thick roots. The last two ran. She didn't chase them. Instead, she walked to the cage, eyes on Jake. "You should have come to me," she said softly. "I wanted to protect you," Jake whispered. She knelt beside the cage. Her hand glowed with soft light, and the door opened like a flower blooming. He stumbled out, falling into her arms. Valera touched the marks on his chest. They tried to break the bond. Jake felt the warmth return. "I didn't let them," he whispered. And then, she did something he had never expected. She leaned forward and placed her forehead against his. Their minds touched completely. In that moment, Jake saw her memories. Entire galaxies, ancient ruins, starlight battles, thousands of years of watching civilizations rise and fall. Her loneliness, her power, her grief. And she saw him. His pain, his courage, his quiet strength. When they pulled apart, Jake was no longer just a visitor. He was a part of her now. But far above the forest, another ship hovered in silence, 10 times bigger than the first. The true enemy had arrived. And this time, they didn't want the mark. They wanted the goddess herself. The goddess's rage. The sky above Tilara cracked open with thunder. Not natural thunder, but a rumble from something massive breaking through the planet's upper atmosphere. A ship, huge, black, and shaped like a dagger, descended slowly. Its lights glowed blood red. Its engines burned the clouds. Every living creature on the planet looked up, and every single one of them felt fear. Even Valera. She stood on a cliff's edge, watching it fall from the sky like a shadow made solid. Jake stood beside her, silent. "That's not a scavenger ship," he said. "No," she replied. "It is far worse." Her voice, always calm, now carried something rare, uncertainty. The ship belonged to the collectors. Not pirates, not soldiers, but something darker. A private off-world syndicate that hunted ancient power across the galaxy, especially living energy. They didn't just want to use power. They wanted to own it. Valera was the last of her kind, the final living source of the starborn energy. And now they had come for her. Jake could feel it through the bond, the fear she tried to hide, the weight of being hunted. Again. But this time, she was not alone. "They will land in less than an hour," she said. "We must prepare." Jake turned to her. "Can we fight them?" Valera closed her eyes, and the trees around them began to move. Vines stretched upward. Roots thickened. Flowers turned to sharp points. "I am Silara," she whispered. And Silara remembers how to fight. Within moments, the forest transformed. The ground pulsed with energy. The trees grew taller, their branches twisted into weapons. The wind picked up, carrying spores that could blind and confuse. Animals began to gather, not fleeing, but coming toward Valera, standing beside her. Jake watched in awe. "They're answering your call." She looked at him. "No, our call. You are bonded now. You carry my spirit." Jake felt it too. The marks on his body glowed like fire. His blood felt like liquid light. He didn't know how to control it yet, but something inside him was rising. And it wasn't afraid. Then the enemy arrived. The collector ship opened like a wound, and dozens of black-armored figures dropped to the ground. They wore helmets that hid their faces. Their weapons glowed sickly green. Every step they took burned the soil beneath them. One of them stepped forward, taller than the rest, his armor lined with gold. Commander Ralith. He raised his voice, mechanical and cruel. Goddess of Silara, you are no longer a secret. Step forward and be harvested. You will not be harmed unless you resist. Valera stepped into view, radiant and calm. You cannot harvest what is not for sale. Ralith laughed. We don't need your permission. And then the sky exploded. Valera raised both hands, and lightning struck the ground like a hammer. The wind roared. The trees attacked, their branches slicing through the air. Vines grabbed at the soldiers' legs. Animals charged from the forest. Jake stood beside her, uncertain what to do, until one of the marks on his arm pulsed hard, and suddenly he could feel the planet through her. He could command it too. A soldier aimed at Valera. Jake raised his hand, and a wall of roots burst from the ground, blocking the shot. He blinked in shock. Did I just do that? Valera smiled faintly. You are learning. Jake turned toward the battle. He felt fear, but deeper than that. Something else. Purpose. The battle rage. Collectors fired strange weapons, turning trees to ash. But the forest grew faster than they could destroy it. The ground itself swallowed some of them whole. Lightning fell like rain. But then, one soldier fired something different. A net. Glowing. Screaming. It hit Valera's side, and she fell. Jake ran to her, heart pounding. Valera. Her eyes were dimming. The net pulsed with energy that weakened her, cutting off her connection to the planet. Ralith stepped forward. The goddess falls. Take her. Jake stood over her body. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a survivor. He felt like a protector. The marks on his body burned white-hot. His veins glowed. The bond screamed in his chest. He lifted his hands, and the earth answered. A shockwave tore through the ground, sending soldiers flying. The trees shook. The sky turned gold. And from the cracks in the earth, ancient light burst upward. Jake had unlocked something deeper. Not just Valera's power, but his own. Valera looked up weakly. The bond is complete. Jake knelt beside her. Can you stand? With you, she whispered. Yes. He helped her up. Together, they faced the remaining soldiers. And with one final wave of energy, they drove the collectors back. Not with guns, but with life itself. As the enemy ship fled back to the stars, burning and broken, Valera and Jake stood side by side. The forest healed behind them. The planet calmed. The wind whispered again, not in fear, but in gratitude. Jake looked at her. I think I understand now. What? This isn't about power. It's about balance, connection, purpose. Valera nodded. And you were never just a visitor. But as they turned back toward the cave, a final message played from the fleeing ship. Ralith's voice, broken and cold. You've won this time. But now the galaxy knows she lives. Others will come. Jake looked at the stars. And this time, he wasn't afraid. The final choice. The forest was quiet now. Not silent, but peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. The sky above Silara glowed in soft gold, no longer angry. The trees stood tall and proud. The animals slowly emerged again from their hidden places. The planet was breathing, alive, calm, and healing. Jake Carter stood at the edge of the sanctuary with Valera beside him. The battle was over. For now. The collectors were gone. their ship driven back into the stars. But their message still echoed in the air like a shadow. Others will come. Jake felt it deep in his bones. The bond he shared with Valera was stronger than ever. He could hear the heartbeat of the planet. He could feel her pain, her joy, even her uncertainty. And now, for the first time since he arrived on Solara, he had a choice. Later that day, Valera brought him to the oldest part of the forest, a place no one had walked in thousands of years. The ground here glowed softly with blue roots. A giant tree stood in the center, its bark shining like glass, its branches stretching high into the sky. At its base, a circle of floating stones hummed gently. "A portal," she said, "created by the first starborn. It opens only once every 100 years." For 1 minute, Jake stared. "Where does it go?" "Anywhere," she replied. "It listens to the heart of the one who steps through." Jake understood. The portal would take him home, to Earth, if he asked. He stepped toward it. The marks on his body flickered softly. "If I leave," he said, "what happens to you?" Valera lowered her head. "The bond will remain, but it will grow distant. We will feel each other, but only as echoes." Jake looked down. The weight in his chest grew heavier. He remembered the man he used to be, lost, broken, blaming himself for things he couldn't fix. Floating through life, a nobody. But this world changed him. She changed him. And now he was faced with a decision no one could make for him. Valera walked closer, her eyes glowing soft gold. "You are free," she said. "You have passed the trials. You can go." Jake nodded slowly. "I know." She looked up at him. "But—" He hesitated. "I don't know who I am without you." Valera reached out, touched his face. "You are still you," she said. "Stronger now. Braver. Whole." He stepped closer. "And if I stay, the bond will grow until there is no more difference between us and the planet itself," she said. "You will become part of Solara. No return. No Earth. No time." Jake's eyes widened. "You mean I'll stop being human?" "You will become something else," she said. "Not less. Not more. Just different." He turned toward the portal. It had started to glow brighter. 60 seconds. Jake's heart raced. He remembered his family, his world, the sky of Earth, the food, the music, the laughter. But he also remembered the dark marsh, the animals that bowed, the goddess who walked alone for thousands of years and let him into her soul. 40 seconds. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. Valera did not speak right away. Then softly, "I want you to choose what calls to your heart, not mine." 30 seconds. The wind around the portal picked up. A soft hum filled the air. Jake took a step forward. Then another. The light from the portal touched his body. The marks flared like fire. His Earth-side memories rushed through him like a wave. Home. Family. Warmth. But then, he turned and looked at her. Valera, standing under the sacred tree. Alone. Brave. Glowing. And something inside him snapped into place. 20 seconds. He took a deep breath and walked away from the portal. The light dimmed behind him as the portal slowly closed with a quiet sigh. Valera watched him in silence. He walked up to her and held out his hand. "I choose you," he said simply. Tears formed in her eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she smiled, a smile that hadn't touched her lips in centuries. "You were chosen by fate," she said, "but now, I choose you too." They stood beneath the ancient tree. The planet pulsed with light. And in that moment, something changed, not just in them, but in Solara itself. The bond completed. Jake's body glowed as his human form slowly evolved. Not gone, but more. His senses sharpened. His thoughts stretched farther. He could hear the stars, feel the soil, see the flow of life in the air. He had become something new. Not human, not alien, but the bridge between worlds. Far above the planet, in the darkness of space, other ships had begun to listen. Word had spread. The goddess had returned, but so had her protector. And this time, they would not face her alone.